The best chance of preventing the famously unelectable Pat Buchanan from becoming the Reform Party's presidential nominee in the 2000 election, and therefore the best chance of saving the party from potentially squandering its millions of dollars in guaranteed federal matching funds and gunning it into oblivion, now lies in Donald Trump. As of the party's Nashville meltdown in February, Trump has been a registered party member for months, but he's still taking his sweet time announcing his much-anticipated run for the nomination. Initially bullish about the prospect, going as far as to openly recruit Oprah Winfrey as his running mate, recent events have understandably given him pause. He's increasingly unsure whether he'll be able to run as a reform candidate without making a mockery of himself by association. So, Donald Trump stops for just a beat, and he takes a long look around. Let's look with him. This is what he sees. The man who opposed Jack Gargan during that Nashville debacle, taking away his mic and demanding to get the vote to oust him underway, was National Reform Party Secretary Jim Manja. Manja is a gay man and gay rights activist who allied himself with Perot in the mid-90s, believing that the Reform Party was exactly what it said on the can, a party positioned to reform the entire landscape of American politics. As such, he believed that this was a point at which gay Americans could not afford to sit on the sidelines. Manja has been described as anti-Jack Gargan, and since the battle lines are so clearly drawn, this would figure to place him in the pro-Perot, pro-Buchanan faction by default, but it's a safe bet that Manja is fundamentally at odds with Buchanan, as well as another known figure who's recently been affiliating himself with the Reform Party, a man Trump sees when he looks far to the right, David Duke. Duke is Pat Buchanan's pathetic little baby duckling waddling after Buchanan wherever he goes. If Buchanan takes 90 steps toward racism, Duke goes the full 100, thereby becoming America's most well-known racist. Apparently too racist for the KKK, he got called up to the KKKK, which I did not know existed, and became the youngest KKKK Grand Wizard in history, along the way spouting all the garbage you would expect. He actually found a way to get elected to the Louisiana House in 1989 before pretty much every prominent GOP politician slammed the door on him. As did Buchanan, who at the end of the day is still a cosmopolitan fancy lad who wants to get invited to fancy dinners. But Duke followed him around anyway, speaking of him approvingly during his runs in 92 and 96. Now he's letting it be known that he's thinking about joining the Reform Party to support Buchanan. Duke can be useful to us in that he serves as a sort of homing beacon. If you're wondering who the most racist candidate in the race is, just watch and see where David Duke goes, and you'll have your answer. So, having cast his eyes all the way to the right, Donald Trump now looks all the way to the left and finds Lenora Fulani. Dr. Fulani is among the very few characters on this stage as innately interesting as Perot, with whom she formed a strategic alliance years prior over their shared desire for a third party. Outside of that, they couldn't be much more ideologically different. Fulani is a self-described Marxist, vying to represent the interests of a voting bloc that's long been cast aside and taken for granted. She's disgusted by the Democratic Party's apparent strategy to count black voters as a given while offering them nothing in return, and as a consequence, the Dems bear the overwhelming brunt of her criticism, as they did in 92 when she earned some headlines by standing on a chair and disrupting a Clinton campaign speech. She takes a lot of flack for this, and in fact, sometimes it reads a lot like the smears we'll see applied toward a couple of notable third-party candidates in the years and decades to come. If you're attacking this major candidate from the left, well, that must mean you're an asset of the right. It's this kind of boogeyman argument that places the blame on the outsider candidate for winning those votes rather than the major, far more well-funded candidate for losing them. But hey, you know what? If you want votes, go get them. If you don't, then don't. Simple as. In 1988, Fulani became the first black woman, the first woman, and the first black candidate to secure ballot access in all 50 states as a presidential candidate, which goes a long way toward explaining why Perot wanted her on board. I should probably put my cards on the table again here. Fulani's political position on paper represents mine far more closely than that of just about anybody else's here, but this is the Reform Party, where, regardless of your political orientation, if you're looking for a hero, you're gonna need to keep looking. Fulani comes from the New Alliance Party, or NAP, which for a long time has worked to distance itself from its founder's early affiliation with the infamous Lyndon LaRouche. The NAP has also been described as cult-like, and the line between its political efforts and a closely connected network of therapy clinics, which, for one, are opposed to medical treatment for mental illness, is hazy at best and wildly unethical at worst. Fulani and the NAP's founder, Fred Newman, himself a Jewish man, have been accused of anti-Semitism, a charge Fulani categorically denies. Indeed, her sharp criticisms seem to be strictly limited to Israel, but these charges are still difficult for her to defend herself against, given her unwavering alliance with Louis Farrakhan, who regularly makes headlines that look a little something like that. Despite her clear-as-can-be mission to bolster a third-party presence in American politics, it's tough to know what exactly Lenore Fulani is really all about. And it's not about to get easier, because she is supporting Pat Buchanan. Now, as of the evening of February 12, 2000, this is how the battle lines are drawn. Over the last couple days, we've seen Jesse Ventura jump ship and movement founder Jack Gargan get thrown out. The only thing passing for an opposition right now is Donald Trump's increasingly iffy interest in challenging Buchanan for the nomination. In that sense, it's understandable for Fulani, the third-party or bust pragmatist, to pick the only real coalition left. What's interesting, though, is she aligned herself with Buchanan way back in September. Let's look at what was happening around this time. As a candidate, the newly arrived Buchanan was carrying about as much electricity as a drainage pipe. Meanwhile, Jesse Ventura was the live wire, the guy who clearly represented the Reform Party's best chances long-term. And while Jesse Ventura was not exactly a Marxist, he was decidedly more anti-establishment than the GOP-bred Buchanan. And yet, Fulani not only sided with Buchanan, but signed on to co-chair his campaign. Why? Fulani concedes that politically they're diametrically opposed and she hates everything he stands for. Her explanation for this alliance, maybe the most bizarre alliance in the history of modern American politics, is that the name of the game is building and expanding a coalition to challenge the powers that be, no matter what that coalition looks like, no matter what that means. Fair enough, but when she says,
I don't think that Mr. Buchanan is a racist. I don't think he is an anti-Semite. If I did, I wouldn't support him. I think in many ways he's been demonized.
As demons often are, Fulani is a seasoned political vet. There is no way she doesn't know exactly what Pat Buchanan is all about. I really can't make heads or tails of this. Neither can Donald Trump, who has seemed more baffled by this party with each and every passing day. And Trump hasn't even finished surveying the room yet. He's barely started. As of now, February 12th, Buchanan and Trump are the only reform candidates seen to be plausible nominees, but they are not the only ones seeking the nomination. Not by a long shot. Those $12.6 million in matching campaign funds left by Ross Perot that are dangling from the ceiling, there is, at present, a stampede for that money. It has attracted candidates from the political far left, center, right, far right, forwards, backwards, diagonal, high, low, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. I'm sorry, I'm running out of dimensions. Every single type of candidate you can imagine is here. And before I introduce them to you, I need to emphasize that the office they are seeking is President of the United States. Lorenz Krauss, libertarian guy, won't stop quoting Ayn Rand, will run for president again in 2020, promising to abolish the presidency outright once he's elected, and split up the United States into 4 separate nations in order to protect them from Jewish people, the deep state, Rhodes Scholars, and British agents, which I guess would make him a literal Bond villain. How about that? George Weber, stock party line reform guy. Bill Pearman, stock party line reform guy who's mumbly and looks like he just rolled out of bed. Eric Thompson, staunch anti-war guy who wants America to cut the military budget in half and give up on being a superpower. Okay, this guy's pretty cool. Robert Bowman wants to institute universal health care and abolish the CIA. Alright, you're cool too. Scott Kendall, flat tax guy, boring, next. Harvey Carroll. Hold on. He's gotta go find an easel. Wait right here, okay? Sit tight. Okay, here he is. He wants judges to attend school board meetings. Wait, that's it? You need to be president for that? You had to go get an easel for that? Whatever, he's a Kentuckian. You gotta be a little bit patient with us. We mean well. William Clark, a man of such anonymity that I found one and only one very brief mention of him as a candidate who participated in one debate. Beyond that, nothing. Clark is perhaps the most invisible presidential candidate ever who is registered with a relevant political party, and as such, he deserves recognition. An added distinction, as he does not appear to have gotten any of his stated political positions on the record. He does not register an inch left or right on any matters, and is therefore in a party claiming to be centrist and be in every single thing but. William Clark is the one and only pure centrist. Congratulations to him. Charles Collins, Florida banker who uses the royal we to refer to himself. He scans as sort of a micro Buchanan, a fringe presidential candidate in 1996 who tried running for multiple party nominations, but never generated nearly as much publicity as he did in the mid-80s. That was when he ran a newspaper ad, man do reformers love newspaper ads, in protest of a number of Panama City school teachers who were planning to assign a book to their students that had the word fart in it. Not only was Collins successful in banning the book, his ad inspired numerous and explicit death threats against these teachers who bravely persevered throughout the entire miserable ordeal. Collins claimed to have gathered 9,000 signatures on a petition to ban the fart book. After a local journalist checked the validity of those signatures, she reported that the vast majority were fraudulent. This reporter was then also targeted with death threats that quickly escalated. When somebody sent her a bomb threat, going as far as to plant a fake bomb in her car, Collins dismissed it as a fun little prank. When somebody made multiple efforts to burn down her home with gasoline, Collins said, "What's the big deal? It's just an arson attempt. This way, you can get your landlord to repaint your apartment." So, as Donald Trump surveys the rank and file of this clown car they call the Reform Party, he sees a tasteful assortment of idealists, harmless weirdos, cranks, and malevolent scumbags, but wait, there's more. We must now cast our eyes to the heavens. It's at this point when my beautiful little three-dimensional political spectrum chart, which has been creaking under its own weight for a good while now, completely breaks down. Not even a third dimension will allow us to express the qualities of this final, most spectacular set of candidates. Their politics are unlike anything we are able to directly observe within three-dimensional space. These candidates exist on another plane entirely and must be plotted accordingly. First, there is His Divine Grace, Daniel Clay. Self-described prophet. Looks like he wrote a whole book full of prophecies. Should I buy it? It's $3, what the hell. Alright, bought it. Let's see what we got here. Let's crack this open. Let's hear some prophecies. Lay it on me, Danny. Computers in the future are going to be better. Well, shit. I think I just wasted $3, didn't I? He's running on a campaign of... Okay, looks like he just showed up so he could drop out. Gregory Hollister isn't actually campaigning, doesn't want to be president, has absolutely no political positions or platform, only here so he can stand on stage and preach the word of the Lord. Ken Dixon believes that the biblical end times are here and the world will soon be reduced to ash and cinder, but is such a dedicated Reform Party member that he still gives a shit about the national debt for some reason. And finally, my main man, the man with the plan himself, Dr. Jon Hagelin. Hagelin is a physicist with a PhD from Harvard. This is going to sound pretty normal from the outset. He advocates for renewable energy and a halt on pesticides. He does, of course, oppose PACs and soft money. He talks about gun safety, flat tax relief for low-income households. On the foreign policy front, he intends to resolve the world's ills by, as this story says, working to reduce people's tension. What does that mean? Hagelin is an acolyte of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi who developed the practice of transcendental meditation and promises to bring about world peace as soon as somebody pays him $1 billion to do so. He and others believe that through this practice, one may gain access to the unified field and radiate positive energy that can influence the souls of humanity for the better and eventually become immortal. Hagelin likens skepticism of this idea to the persecution of Galileo. There is, in fact, a plan here. We're gonna save humanity, here's what we gotta do. Calculate 1% of the world's population, which right now is about 5 billion, and then find the square root of that, about 7,000. That's how many people we need to simultaneously practice transcendental meditation. If we can roust up that many and they all do it right, world peace. We're a ways off from that 7,000, it would seem. In one effort in 1986, there were only 22 takers. Crucially, acres of foam mat were rolled out to assist in this effort. You see, the problem here is that if you are completely pure of heart, if you're really, really good at meditating, you're gonna levitate and eventually start flying around. Pretty soon, you're gonna have a bunch of yogis whizzing all over the joint like deflating balloons, and they're eventually going to need a soft surface to land on. Any questions? Is everybody clear on expectations and next steps? Okay, good. Dr. Hagelin offers us something truly special. He is the quantum candidate, occupying two spaces at once. He simultaneously inhabits this unknowable political realm and offers a coherent platform that allows him to present as a recognizable politician. Do I believe any of that unified field stuff? No, but I believe that he believes it. And I believe he genuinely wants to improve the lives of his fellow human beings. None of this is hurting anybody. He's got his own thing going on. Good for him. And besides, it might not hurt to have an iron in the fire and the remote chance he's right about all that stuff. I mean, he did go to Harvard, right? That's not the kind of thing you want to get caught napping on. You know, I feel like a long while back we stuck a pin in something we were going to remember to bring up later. Where was it? Oh yeah. Remember when Ross Perot founded the party in 1995 and declared no weirdos allowed? I guess if you gotta make a promise like that, you're already done for, huh? Anyway, Mr. Trump, here you have it. This is the Reform Party as it exists in the year 2000. This is what an ostensible commitment to centrism and the promise of $12.6 million will get you. It's got us all jittery. Instead of hitting the centrist bullseye, nearly all of us are hitting everything but. Our darts are landing way left and way right. Some of us aren't even hitting the board, we're just turning around and chucking darts out an open window. Trump spends a number of months taking all of this in, and then he says, I'm out. You people are too weird and too racist for Donald Trump's liking. Trump is gone. Jesse Ventura is gone. Before our eyes, the Reform Party is, with startling quickness, becoming Patrick Buchanan's party. He has the green light. There's no one left to stop him. The Perot camp that recruited him had hoped he would holster his putrid and unpopular positions on social issues, run on a platform that at least somewhat represented the Reform Party brand of centrism, and ride his name recognition to a showing strong enough to let him fight another day. That is not happening. With all potential formidable opposition out of the picture, Buchanan is now free to revert to his true form. He declares that he will be the most anti-abortion candidate and that the Reform Party will be the most anti-abortion party, vowing to, quote, fight the culture of death. He counteracts Perot's previous efforts to welcome gay Americans into the party and declares that he will refuse to select a running mate who is gay, calling it a disorder and a wrong orientation. After Party Secretary Jim Manja, who himself is gay, takes offense to this, a Buchanan surrogate sends out a party-wide email effectively calling Manja trash and biological waste, stepping clearly over the line into hate speech with both feet. Buchanan naturally races to the surrogate's defense, which you could argue gives Buchanan supporters tacit permission to eventually issue Manja death threats. Buchanan and his supporters bring back a rallying cry from prior campaigns, lock and load. Although he's singularly incapable of generating broad appeal, he does have a small core supporter base he can rile up at the drop of a hat, and they love yelling lock and load at campaign rallies. This is understandably beginning to worry a lot of people throughout the party. Nothing ever comes of it, thankfully. During the California convention, however, when an old woman comes forward to voice a concern, Buchananites shout her down with a chorus of lock and loads so thunderous she bursts into tears. As a direct consequence of Buchanan's ascent, the Reform Party is unraveling at the state levels. The Minnesota branch, of course, is in the process of disaffiliating, and now Wisconsin and Alabama are among a few other states that are realizing they need to decouple themselves from this. The quality that's made Buchanan most existentially dangerous to this party is his decades of experience as a hardened and unfeeling political operative. His education began in the Nixon and Reagan White Houses and continued with his multiple pursuits of the GOP nomination. He knows all the maneuvers, all the tricks, and we're seeing that now. In the spring of 2000, as George W. Bush and Al Gore are attempting to win over their own parties, get out in front of America and define their candidacies, Buchanan is instead quietly scurrying around to every low-visibility reform convention he can, not to win over the reform delegates, but to assess their loyalty. If they're not in lockstep with Buchanan, or maybe even if they are, he moves to have them thrown out and replaced with one of his own loyalists. This is a coup. It's an effective one too, and it's easy to see why. This is a party of outsiders and idealists who, from the outset, have decried politics as usual. It's worth remembering that Orson Swindle, Perot's unofficial campaign chair in '92, wore his and Perot's lack of political experience as a badge of honor. They were not ready for somebody like Pat Buchanan, who was prepared to mobilize a hostile party takeover from the jump. The only other person on this board who's been truly battle-tested is Lenora Fulani, who of course is a Buchanan supporter. Would you believe that now Ross Perot is experiencing another of his signature catastrophically timed flip-flops? That he now understands the dangers of letting Buchanan into the henhouse and realizes his error right after it's too late? Okay, it's first worth emphasizing that without a doubt, Perot pulled the strings to help secure Buchanan as the reform nominee, before we now dig into a Robert Novak column that drops on February 14th, just 2 days after Buchanan forces took control of the party in Nashville. Perot's surrogate, Russ Verney, tells Novak that Perot is experiencing an acute case of buyer's remorse. Perot is now turning his back on Buchanan completely, even going so far as to daydream about the possibility of the Reform Party simply endorsing GOP candidate John McCain instead of running its own candidate. Perot is upset with Buchanan's failure to sufficiently denounce Adolf Hitler after his blowback from his recently published book. Within, he wrote that America should have never entered World War II because Hitler wasn't a threat and America could have gotten along with him. Which, of course, is nothing new. Buchanan has been saying nice things about Hitler for decades and in places where everybody could see it. It's pretty rich to hear this from Perot now. The time to experience this epiphany would have been 6 months ago, but Ross Perot, damn it, he's done it again. Just like in '92 when he allowed a completely fabricated ghost story to scare him out of the race, he's allowed himself to be suckered again. And just like in '92, he couldn't even say he was suckered by a skilled con man. Scott Barnes was a compulsive and unconvincing liar, and everybody knew it. Similarly, Pat Buchanan was no snake in the grass. There was no deception here. He was always this person. That's going to be the legacy left by Ross Perot, the politician. A sucker. And if you won't like that framing in the years to come, well, I'm being pretty charitable here because the alternative, that he was fine with a Nazi sympathizer leading the party as long as he practiced good manners, is a lot worse. Side one was always the Perot side until now. Verney, being his unwavering surrogate, follows him across the line. Manja, of course, has been totally opposed to Buchanan for some time. On side two, they find the ghosts of a lot of former allies Perot alienated who sure would be nice to have around right now. We can't even say that Perot made an ill-fated deal with the devil because the thing about deals with the devil is that the devil typically offers something you want. But as we move through June, this is what's offered. With Bush and Gore playing each other close in the polls, the third banana is now Ralph Nader, the Green Party candidate. Just 4 years ago, the Green Party was irrelevant as we expect third parties to be, accruing less than 1% of the popular vote, and less than 10% of the showing of a version of Ross Perot who was trying even less hard than usual. They were totally immaterial. But just to draw from personal experience for a moment, at this point in history, I'm in high school. I read the paper. I'm loving the stories about the Reform Party purely for the entertainment value and the photos of various weirdos pushing and shoving and yelling at each other. But at some point, reporters actually want to report on movements that are going somewhere, so I started to see more coverage of Ralph Nader and a Green Party that's significantly left of the Dems. Universal free healthcare? I've never heard that before. Raising the minimum wage? I make $6 an hour wrangling grocery carts in the Kroger parking lot. I care about that. Oh, turns out Nader was the seatbelt guy. At least this guy can say he's gone out there and done something. What has Buchanan ever done except sit around and write his dumbass books and cry like a baby about how there aren't enough white people? Fucking loser. That's how high school me sees him, that's clearly how a lot of people see him, and that is what he is. By the end of June, Buchanan is sitting at 2%, far lower than Perot ever was, even at his lowest. And wow, what do you know? It's in June that Lenora Fulani resigns from her post inside Buchanan's campaign after suddenly being troubled by the far-right leanings he's always had. She now throws her support behind the person who is now the only option left. The distant longshot who is nonetheless the only other player with a meaningful candidacy, John Hagelin. The good doctor has fiercely objected to Buchanan's ascent in recent months, both for his misanthropic positions and what he and others are terming as strong-arm politics within the party. To wit, in addition to trying to rig state conventions in his favor, it's believed that if that doesn't pay off, Buchanan is prepared to navigate some loopholes to have the primary results rescinded entirely. According to one state party official, Buchanan's been bulldozing anybody and everybody, including those who would have been receptive to him. This does seem to line up with both his brand of politics and his electoral performance. He doesn't know anything about winning people over. He clearly wouldn't know what that's like. Jesse Ventura's prediction was on the money. It would seem that Buchanan does, in fact, want to hijack this party and its matching funds to use as his personal far-right political vehicle in the future, but it's obvious to everyone except him, his staff, and his pitchfork brigade that all he's doing here is steering it into a wall. If he keeps going the way he's going, those matching funds are going away. After sitting in the backseat for decades, Buchanan finally has the car keys he's coveted his entire career, but he never learned how to drive. July 1st, 2000. I think Ross Perot was thinking about it. He was really thinking about it, just as he did in '96 upon realizing his appointed successor was a losing horse. But as a key June 30th deadline passed last night, Perot confirmed that he will not seek a third presidential run despite an enthusiastic effort within the party to draft him. The Deus Ex Machina is off the table. For the anti-Buchanan faction of the Reform Party, it's Hagelin or bust. A familiar feeling of dread drifts over the party in anticipation of its national convention to be held in Long Beach, California in August. It's shaping up to be another Nashville, complete with underhanded tactics. Buchanan is moving to install one of his own people as the head of the credentialing committee, which gives final say over who gets seated. It's just the latest signal that he is boa constricting this party, snuffing out any and every dissenting force possible. Just like the Nashville meeting, there's a conference call preceding this convention that soon devolves into a screaming match. It's unknown whether anybody looks up for long enough to notice that entering the convention, a Gallup poll now puts Buchanan at 1%, well below even Nader. This is no longer a third party, it's a fourth party, if that. All those voters who Perot and Ventura spent the 90s luring away from the Dems and GOP, well, now they're headed right back into the waiting arms of the Dems and GOP. Third-party diehards are now being absorbed by the Green Party. So that leads us to the question, who makes up this remaining unextractable tree stump, this 1% of likely voters? Surprise! The National Alliance, an explicitly neo-Nazi group, really likes to look at this Reform Party all of a sudden, with its leader pledging to get out the vote for Pat Buchanan. The secessionist, white supremacist League of the South organization also pledges fealty. The Perot loyalists still in the Reform Party who are horrified by all this now just start chucking Hail Marys. They actually managed to vote Buchanan off the Reform primary ballot, but it's not binding and can be knocked down by a 2/3 vote of the convention, in which Buchanan's people will get to decide who votes. You know, in a party that looked at least a little bit like normal, a divisive candidate seeking a party's nomination would promise to build bridges, repair wounds, unite the party. Buchanan explicitly sheds any such illusions by promising he is about to crush Hagelin and anybody else who stands in his way. August 8th in Long Beach, California. It's Tuesday. The convention doesn't officially begin until Thursday, but the fireworks begin early as we're treated to a replay of the Nashville debacle that often follows it beat for beat. There's a disagreement about rules and regulations and various minutiae again that leads to pushing and shoving and shouting again. A Reform Party official yells, "This is illegal," which Jack Gargan yelled in Nashville verbatim. Police are called again. A Reform Party official dares police to arrest him again. Ross Perot is nowhere to be seen again. By this point, the father of the party has fallen so far off the map that he didn't even respond to an invite. But his top surrogate, Russ Verney, is here, and he's leading an anti-Buchanan rebellion on the fly with party secretary Jim Manja. Today, and in the days to follow, Manja will spend a whole lot of time looking intensely annoyed, pointing, yelling, and pointing while also yelling. If Michelangelo had painted the story of the Reform Party in the Sistine Chapel, this one would be on the ceiling somewhere. Manja, both thumbs proudly down in protest of some undoubtedly boring little procedural thing that's been lost to history, is upstaging his fellow senior party official and blocking him from speaking into the mic. That official is the recently promoted interim Reform Party chairman, the absolutely perfectly named Jerry Moan. Moan was the prototypical early Ross Perot supporter, a Vietnam War vet and MIA activist determined to bring the major parties to heel. He became Perot's longtime point man in Long Island, and at one point through the party's endorsement to Tom Galata, a powerful Republican politician there, and a pretty significant extension of the olive branch. Moan made sure they celebrated Galata, even getting the whole party together to hold a brunch in his honor. Galata told Moan, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll be there," and then completely flaked on him, leaving poor Jerry to vamp and fill time for 4 excruciating hours. At some point, he just started individually saying hello to every single person who was there. But Jerry Moan is used to this. He's the high school chemistry teacher who knows he's unrespected, resented, even hated, and is fine with that because at some point it will be 2:30 and he can go home. When he allegedly ignores a party rule, thereby allowing Buchananites to storm the nomination vote, multiple people, including Manja, compare him to Hitler. But Jerry's not Hitler, he's just a guy trying to do his job. In a party ostensibly all about centrism, he's the only one determined to hold the center. Now, I'm sure Manja would tell you that when up against a threat as existential as Pat Buchanan, a stone-cold political operator who's been spending all year poking away at Reform Party rules and procedures like it's a Jenga tower, the party, including its chairman, has no choice but to stand in clear opposition. Manja might be right about that. In fact, I think he is right. But if Jerry is thought to be a Buchananite, he's misunderstood. I would call him Pontius Pilate, except that would necessitate a Christ figure, and there are none of those within 1,000 miles of here. Instead, he's simply a pragmatist, one who seems to have read ahead and knows how this is going to end. Early this year, Jerry openly predicted that on its present course, the Reform Party was headed for destruction, but had little interest in trying to change that course. Later, he speculated that the Reform Party would go down in history as a niche operation that, at best, will give American voters a little something to think about on their way to eventual ruin. He's the only one within the party who's been talking like this. He seems to know that it doesn't really matter whether Buchanan or Hagelin or anybody else wins this nomination. He's fully reckoned with the fact that all of this is toast. So why is he still here? Why bother? Well, he loves this party every bit as much as Manja does, but rather than trying to beat back the oncoming hordes, he seems content to simply carry out the duties of his office faithfully and impartially with the dignity it deserves. He's determined to run this party as it always should have been run. If the party can't survive a few days of being run like the big kids do it, it was all for nothing anyway. Interim Chairman Moan rules that anyone in the room, regardless of who they are or what their party registration is, can vote on who will be seated at the convention, which everyone knows tips the scales fully in Buchanan's favor. Perot surrogate Russ Verney tries to push and shove his way into the room, but security throws him out. Pat Buchanan's campaign now declares victory. He is now the presumptive nominee of the Reform Party. Or at least one of the Reform parties. Coordinating over walkie-talkies, Jim Manja and Russ Verney round up all the John Hagelin supporters, stage a walkout, and march next door, where they will throw their own convention. There are now 2 Reform parties, with 2 conventions on the same street. One will nominate Buchanan, one will nominate Hagelin, and both will go to the Federal Election Commission and argue that they are the real Reform Party and they should receive the $12.6 million in matching funds. So we're left with two simultaneous conventions held by two Reform parties who hate each other. What does that look like? Well, let's watch a little C-SPAN. First, scenes from the Buchanan Reform Convention, the one people had actually been planning and setting aside money for. It shows. They got a nice big done-up stage. They even have their own band, playing the exact sort of shit you would imagine Pat Buchanan likes to listen to. Among the first speakers is filmmaker Joe Strite, who recently made a documentary about the ascent of the Reform Party. She was gracious enough to agree to speak here, but I want to clarify that she is not affiliated with the Buchanan Reform Party, and you probably could have figured that out for yourself since she comes off as a nice person with interesting things to say.
It was a great story, and it was an opportunity to take a journey through American democracy.
Oh no, she called America a democracy instead of a republic. This is going to expose her to the most annoying, well, actually, American politics has to offer. You know, amongst all the bigotry and Machiavellian takeover tactics, one quality of this Buchananite faction that gets lost is how unbelievably annoying they are. If it's not the most annoying political faction in American history, it's close. I need a break, so let's see how things are going over at the Hagelin convention, where John Hagelin himself is speaking right now. Earlier I called him the quantum candidate, and now you are about to get the full experience. Here he is on education. You know that old yarn about how humans only utilize 5 or 10% of their intellectual potential, which is known to be complete ascientific bullshit?
5% of the innate potential of the brain is not enough.
Well, he gives us that, which is unsurprising coming from the guy who believes we can meditate ourselves to immortality. But he also gives us this, and for obvious reasons, I'd like to remind you that we are now in the year 2000.
If we want to bolster our national security, number one, stop creating enemies throughout the world.
We've heard this logic from others, and we still hear it in our time, that the reason we should stop prosecuting wars, fomenting coups of democratically elected leaders around the world, the list goes on, is that it will make us safer. Sure, but I always felt something very important was missing from that calculus. And this, moments later, is what separates Hagelin from every other candidate of the 21st century I can recall whose name has been printed on a presidential ballot.
We have become the principal target of terrorism on earth, not because we stand for freedom, but because our government continues to do hateful things to other nations in the name of the American people, and that will stop.
America should abandon its present foreign policy, Hagelin says, not simply because it compromises our national security, or because it's expensive, or because it's wasteful, or because it's merely an inadvisable move on a chessboard, but because it is immoral and hateful and wrong. It's an anti-war positioning that stands out as starkly as Jesse Ventura's did. You're not likely to hear this from a candidate from the two major parties because doing so would incriminate the parties and donors funding them. This is the promise of a party like Reform. They're at total liberty to assess things as they are, not as they're meant to be seen. Now, this complete absence of a playpen also means that all their other silly ideas, for instance Hagelin's Professor X stuff, can run wild. And once American voters look past Hagelin's generally likable affect, which is roughly 2 parts Michael McKean and 1 part John Nagovich, and take stock of those ideas, he's unelectable. He's probably not even approaching 5% matching funds territory. President John Hagelin is not possible, but he presents what is possible, what could be, and what, this time at least, will not be. Speaking of, let's walk back next door to the Buchanan Reform Convention, where around this same time, Jerry Moan is at the podium trying to get everybody seated and start the proceedings. He wants to reference this line, "Fools rush in where angels fear to tread." It's a good line. Not really sure why he wants to use it here, but he's gonna try to rework it into some sort of announcement that it is time to be seated. Knock 'em dead, Jerry.
Angels may rush in, but don't fear to tread into your seat.
God damn it, Jerry. On day 3 of the Buchanan Reform Convention, Pat Buchanan is officially introduced as the nominee. Earlier in the day, Jerry presides over a smorgasbord of various speakers and housekeeping items. The words "point of order" are repeated 20 billion times, and of course, You can't hold a Reform Party event without some kind of equipment malfunction. Remember a few months back when a Reform Party debate was continually interrupted when the mic stand kept falling over? I've dug up so many times that's happened with the Reform Party. At some meeting or campaign stop or whatever, a banner will fall off the ceiling, signs tear themselves off the wall, mics fall over, you name it. Not even the party's inanimate objects can keep themselves together. So it's with this knowledge that we take in this question directed to Chairman Moan.
Is there a motion to close? Yes, sir.
Oh man, look at that eye roll. I have no idea who this guy is, but Jerry sure seems to.
My name is Eric Owens from the 26th Congressional District, and I want to...
Dude, just hold the mic. Just put down the sign. You don't need the Buchanan sign. Everybody in this room is already in the tank for Buchanan. Just chill out. Just put down the sign. Take the mic. Hold on to the mic. Hold on to the mic.
Okay.
Soon after, another Reform Party member comes forward, takes the floor mic.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
John Ayala, San Gabriel, California.
And delivers a speech for the ages.
Are you a delegate, sir?
No, I'm not.
Sorry, I can't allow you to speak.
Thank you, sir.
If that doesn't make you proud to be an American, you ought to check your pulse. All this gives you a taste of what the life of party chairman has been like for Jerry. All the egos and factions and cults of personality have been far, far bigger than he could ever be. Upon stepping into the role in May, he freely admitted he'd be a figurehead, a passive entity at the whim of whichever waves come rolling through. All he can do is ensure changes come about in an orderly manner. He's powerless to stop anything, including this. Jerry Moan was hoping he could avoid one particularly painful piece of business before concluding the early session.
One other item, sir.
I'm sorry. Time out. I tried to get to lunch.
He cannot.
I move that we recall the National Secretary.
I second that motion.
No, everybody, time out.
Several Buchanan reformers jump in line to second the motion to oust Jim Manja as party secretary. Jerry cannot stop this.
Mr. Manja has been a long-standing member of this party.
Throwing Manja out of the party is a formality at this point, as he's already chosen his side, but...
And he has chosen his will.
These two go back.
But we will be respectful.
Jerry and Jim were allies once, maybe even friends. They both joined the movement in the early 90s, before the Reform Party was even founded, when the promise of Ross Perot and all he stood for seemed greater than ever. Maybe Jerry is thinking back on those times. Maybe he's reflecting on the homophobia some of those very people in this room have lobbed in Manja's direction. Maybe there's a difference between knowing all this will fall apart and watching it fall apart in front of him.
That's been seconded.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McLaughlin, Mr. Vice Chairman, would you take the microphone?
He can't be part of this. He can't do it. Other things will happen on this stage today. Buchanan will accept the nomination and live out his pathetic little fantasy. Confetti will drop, pyrotechnics will shoot from the rafters. None of it will matter. Within the Buchanan faction, at least, the question of whether or not any of this should be taken even the least bit seriously is definitively answered by the introduction of Izola Foster, Buchanan's choice for vice presidential nominee. This campaign season she'll say, quote, "I think they're the most wonderful group of people I've ever met. The they there is the super duper far right group, the John Birch Society." Foster has been politically active for some time. On multiple occasions, she's come to the defense of the police officers who beat Rodney King, saying they acted in the line of duty, and going so far as to throw a benefit in honor of one of the cops who was sentenced to prison, describing him as, quote, "a political prisoner." Foster was a longtime high school teacher who's very outspokenly opposed to free school lunch with a strange level of intensity. She was staunchly opposed to providing public education for illegal immigrants, which, due to the makeup of her student body, made her vastly unpopular. She was eventually chased off by a roving gang of Maoists, a tale as old as time, and joined Buchanan's GOP primary campaign in 1996. There are, of course, people from every kind of background and ethnicity who can and do sit in pretty much every single slice of the political spectrum. Still, the press is understandably intrigued by a black woman who's running with a guy who has, to take just one example, endorsed the belief that white people are genetically superior. During her introductory press conference, when she's asked about the role race will play in her campaign, Foster says,
"There's only one race that we're interested in, and that's the race to the White House."
And if you're wondering whether there's any more to it than that, I can confirm there's really not. I did the due diligence of buying and reading her entire book. None of it will make it in here because, frankly, there's nothing really very meritable in it except for this. I got an autograph copy. Look at that. Now, look at how she signs her name. Isola Foster. Huh? That's pretty cool, right? You can't say that isn't cool. Anyway, Buchanan and Foster are the Reform Party nominees, although whether it's the Reform Party is up for debate. Immediately after the convention, the Hagelin sect files a complaint with the Federal Election Commission arguing that they should be the ones to receive those millions of dollars in matching funds. A lot of it comes down to whether he can get his name on ballots, and Hagelin's argument is that he's able to do so via the Natural Law Party ticket he ran on in '96. It's not a great argument. Meanwhile, the Hate Talk Express keeps on rolling. Buchanan gives a speech at Bob Jones University, which has drawn fire recently due to its institutional opposition to interracial dating. Buchanan is offended, not by that, but by all the criticism the university has taken as a result. He is here for that purpose, to let everybody know, for the 10,000th time, which side he is on. Historically, he's gotten away with this stuff by talking out of both sides of his mouth, which, again, I would argue is not skilled deception. It doesn't let Perot off the hook for initially supporting him or CNN for putting him on air. Buchanan simply spills out his bile, then says the magic words that give people permission to look the other way. Example, after the convention, Buchanan proclaims that bigots have no place in his party, before immediately hopping right back on his hobby horse and telling gay people they are avatars of American destruction. That proclamation, though, is a problem for Buchanan. He's alienating the various white nationalist and white supremacist groups who make up so much of his voter and volunteer base, with a lot of them feeling like he's turned his back on him. After temporarily soaring in the polls to the majestic heights of 4%, he makes himself at home in the 1% range. This while stating that his primary objective, his only hope, is to rise to 15% in the polls so that he qualifies to participate in debates with Bush and Gore. Which will not happen, but even if it did, it would present a whole new batch of problems for Buchanan because the more Americans have to look at him and hear him talk, the more they dislike him. His unfavorability ratings are through the roof. It's incredible, really. Probably historic. Late in September, 61% of those polled by the Hackensack Record in New Jersey register an unfavorable opinion of Buchanan. That they ran this poll in a traditionally blue state doesn't make these numbers any less horrifying for Buchanan. A favorable rating in the low teens is something you typically only see when people are polled on, say, Congress as a whole. Never an individual politician, and definitely never a candidate who's never even held elected office before. He doesn't even get the outsider bump that third-party candidates typically do, which Nader demonstrates well here. There are lots of likely voters who have no intention of actually voting for Nader, but they at least like the idea of him. Not so with Buchanan, who holds near universal name recognition. Everybody knows him, and everybody hates him. Staring electoral humiliation dead in the face, and still unable to access those $12.6 million in federal matching funds while Hagelin's case works its way through the FEC, Buchanan calls out into the darkness for Ross Perot, begging for the party's founder, who once welcomed him and later moved against him, to now save him. And Ross takes us all by surprise. He does emerge from the shadows, ending a complete self-imposed exile that has lasted longer than a year. But he isn't here to help Buchanan. Instead, Perot submits an affidavit to the FEC arguing that he, the candidate who earned all those matching funds in the first place, believes John Hagelin and Jim Manja are the rightful owners of those funds. The only game left for anyone to play here is to somehow claw to 5% in the popular vote to keep the lights on in 2004. And although Hagelin is such a long shot that he isn't included in polls, there are at least unknowns here. He's a nice-seeming man who can eloquently communicate the reform platform. Give him some money to work with, and who knows? Buchanan's ceiling, on the other hand, is painfully obvious. he's not getting there. Perot's affidavit is a devastating rebuke of Buchanan and an unambiguous admission that Ross Perot deeply and truly screwed up in recruiting him in the first place. But it's not enough. The FEC rules that the money will go to Buchanan. They might as well wheel it out to the backyard and burn it. I don't think he'd make it to 5% if they gave him 10 times this much, because ultimately you're not allowed to hire people to vote for you. With this money, he buys an expansive and defeatist run of radio ads pleading voters to cast their lot with him just for the sake of having a third party. His campaign also produces and runs the infamous anti-immigration meatball ad. Within, a man chokes on his meatball, calls 911, sits through an automated menu in which he's asked to select Spanish, Korean, Swedish, or Swahili, and dies, never having reached the English option. A reporter asked Buchanan what this guy, who clearly couldn't speak, would have done even if he did get English. Ah yeah, whoops. Guess he still would have died, huh? So, how do you poll if just about nobody can stand you to begin with, and then you run a TV ad, and since the premise of the ad is inherently nonsensical, you're really just airing a 30-second TV show where somebody dies for no reason? Well, you're cast into the dreaded less than 1% domain. These polls typically survey around 800 likely voters, which would mean that more than 0 but fewer than 8 people answered Buchanan. The flu would poll better than this. I think one of the most important lessons life has to teach us is to take our laughs where we can get them, so let's get them here. It is not only deeply satisfying, but incredibly funny to watch this well-moneyed loser shit his pants in full view of the entire nation, made more so by the knowledge that he wants to be president worse than anyone has ever wanted to be president. He wants it so bad. Remember when Perot quit the 92 race and still polled at 16% a full 2 months later despite not actually even being a candidate? These days, Buchanan is pointing to his recent gallbladder surgery as a reason why his momentum is stalled. But remember in 96 when Perot completely mailed it in, pretty much refused to go outside, and got 8 million people to vote for him anyway? Yeah, this right here is the good stuff. Buchanan would do anything to get votes, he just doesn't know how. Look at this, now he's denouncing tobacco lawsuits as shakedowns. I don't think he's getting paid to do this, which I believe would make him the only person in America dumb enough to defend big tobacco for free. Meanwhile, Azola Foster is making a campaign stop to defend the Confederate flag and meet with a guy who says slavery was actually good. They're just flailing. He's adrift. He's sitting in his home in McLean, Virginia, talking to his cat, telling him that one day he'll have a Secret Service detail, musing that lots of people out there wish he was dead. An idea that Pat Buchanan, being Pat Buchanan, takes solace in. In fact, there's a lot of loneliness going around. On the same day, just a few miles away from Buchanan, Hagelin is speaking with one of the few journalists who will give him the time of day. He's still in the race, running under the natural law banner he's reusing from 96, and at the moment he's trying to explain to this poor journalist how natural law works exactly. You see, it's like a pen. You know how you drop a pen and it falls on the ground? It's like that. You get it? No? Just two ships sinking in the night. Around this time, the loneliness is felt by Jesse Ventura as well. He's still governing the state of Minnesota, but he's having the hardest time getting anything passed, getting anything done. He's the only independent, and can't seem to make friends with anybody on either side of the aisle. It's perhaps a window into what things might have been like had the Perot pipe dream ever come to pass. Okay, they win the presidency. Now what? All the same, Ventura is probably happy to be so clearly proven right about Buchanan. In fact, he goes as far as to speculate that this is all happening according to plan, that someone, perhaps the GOP, sent Buchanan to infiltrate the Reform Party, take it over, and steer it off a cliff. There's no real evidence supporting this theory beyond the observation that Buchanan is running what is far and away the worst well-funded presidential campaign America has ever seen. Given how desperately Buchanan continues to labor over the final days, if that is indeed his purpose, it's clear nobody told him, and that simply being himself is doing the job just fine. Even for Ross Perot, life these days is not at all like he imagined. This is a man who once considered George H.W. Bush his mortal enemy. Some kind of old Texas beef, probably. Although he didn't typically single out and attack his opponents in the campaigns, Perot did really seem to relish the idea of sticking it to Bush and enjoy the narrative that he'd cost him a second term. And yet, on the Thursday before Election Day, Perot does the unthinkable. He endorses Bush's son. This is Ross Perot's final, unmistakable goodbye to the Reform Party he founded. He will never appear at a Reform meeting or convention again. He won't affiliate himself with them. He won't speak to them. He won't speak about them. It's over. Well, we're losing main characters with each passing day. Nothing left to do but check in on what old fucknuts is up to. The next day, a truly astonishing poll is published. It's among a set of polls, each of which ask, per usual, whether likely voters intend to vote for Bush, Gore, Nader, or Buchanan. A lot of battleground state poll results indicate that Buchanan can claim no meaningful strongholds and is flatlining everywhere. The Pennsylvania poll doesn't even include a percentage for him, but does at least acknowledge he exists, which I guess is something. The Newsweek national poll doesn't even list him at all, perhaps just burying his total within the unprinted 7% margin of also-rans here. In most other national polls, he's locked in at 1 point, but in the Gallup poll, the most recognized poll and the one I prefer to use whenever it's been available, Buchanan does not register. The sample size is far larger than that of any other poll here, more than 2,000 likely voters. Maybe Buchanan's showing was too small to print? The same Gallup poll results published by another paper offer clarity, 0%. Well, still, maybe Buchanan's showing was less than 1 point and they rounded down? Doesn't seem so. This earlier poll makes it clear that if you register a non-zero number that's less than 1, Gallup will say so and put you down for a fraction. So, as far as I can figure, it would seem as though exactly 0 of the 2,128 likely voters surveyed answered Buchanan. A flat 0 for the standard bearer of a political party that in the last election never polled below 5%, even at its worst. For a household name known to virtually everyone whose campaign has had $12 million to spend over the last 6 weeks, 0 likely voters. This is incomprehensible. A party that has survived so much could not survive him. He has destroyed the only third party capable of wielding influence at the national level, the only serious challenge of the two-party system of the last century. And although he relied on plenty of help from those who propped the door open for him, he did it all by himself. The day this poll drops, he's in Hartford, Connecticut, speaking to a room the paper charitably describes as sparsely attended, but they print a photo. There's literally 1 person in attendance. And by the way, yes, another sign does fall down. He spends some of the day walking around town. I'm sure people recognize him, but no one wants to talk to him, save for one supporter who still says he is not voting for him. Pat Buchanan is still stumbling through 16-hour days of relentless campaigning, traveling, eating crappy airport food, losing sleep, in so doing adding the pitch-perfect finishing touches of the most humiliating defeat in the history of American presidential politics. He clings to his one and only source of consolation, his tiny, puttering, two-stroke imagination in which he dreams that one day after he's dead he'll be vindicated and everybody will realize he was right all along. In the 2000 United States presidential election, Al Gore wins the popular vote with nearly 51 million. George W. Bush, despite falling about 500,000 short of that figure, is ruled to have won the electoral vote and therefore becomes the 43rd president of the United States. Ralph Nader, despite polling at 5% near the end, wins about 2.7% and therefore does not secure matching funds for the Green Party in 2004. John Hagelin, running under the Natural Law banner, receives a little more than 80,000 votes nationwide. Patrick Buchanan finishes with 448,895 votes. This, of course, makes the Reform Party ineligible for those matching funds, which they will never receive again. It is probably technically accurate to say that Pat Buchanan spoiled the election of George W. Bush, but only strictly technically. It's easy to see why so many Palm Beach County voters might have accidentally voted for the wrong guy. You see the second guy, you assume you're supposed to punch the second hole. That hole actually belonged to Pat Buchanan, who received an extraordinary bump in this county as a result. It just as easily could have been any other candidate in that slot and things would have turned out the exact same way. If, for example, Ralph Nader were in that slot and he saw a bump, it wouldn't raise so many red flags. What's special about Buchanan being here, though, is that it builds a very strong case that these votes were indeed accidental. This was a man who just won 0.3% of the vote in Florida statewide, and yet he won an otherwise unexplainable 0.8%, more than double that, in a county with a high representation of Jewish people and people of color, who Buchanan had spent decades working overtime to alienate. I mean, come on, you're telling me that 1 in 125 people would actually vote for this guy? Get serious, that is beyond the realm of possibility. Even Buchanan himself admitted this much, that those votes should not have been his. So while Buchanan did not impact any outcome, his supreme, unparalleled unelectability really put a bow on it. Here he won well over 1,000 more votes than he had any business winning, the vast majority of which were surely cast by people trying to vote for Gore. Just 600 or so more votes for Gore would have won him Florida, and therefore the presidency. This was the Reform Party's final moment of national relevance, however incidental. When Jack Gargan ran for Tampa City Council in 1974, he spent 40 cents and won 1,600 votes. In other words, 1,000 votes cost him 25 cents. We'll do our due diligence here and account for inflation. 25 cents in 1974 accounted for 91 cents in 2000. Gargan didn't win, but it was a respectable showing and the definition of efficiency. This was a powerful expression of his determination to get big money out of politics, but it was also a reflection of how electable he was, how likable he was, how strongly his message really resonated with people. Not counting any other funding, strictly the $12.6 million of federal matching funds, 1,000 votes cost Pat Buchanan approximately $28,000. "24 years later, the Reform Party is still here. A lot of their website still looks like something you might have seen on the internet in the year 2000, and I mean that as a compliment. It's nice, simple, straightforward, the qualities reformers have always hoped to see in their party. They do still put forward presidential candidates, although in that department they've settled firmly into the middle of the pack of fourth parties who never even scratch the paint of the Dems or GOP. Some of their members hold elected office in small towns and villages, mostly within the state of New York. Recently, the Reform Party finally excised the last remaining far-right Buchananite elements from their party, patching up the legal framework that had allowed them entry. This took them 20 entire years, which is remarkable because Buchanan himself immediately bailed on the party he had insisted on conquering. He did begrudgingly make an appearance at the next summer's convention in 2001, dipping in and out within a half hour's time. A reporter managed to flag him down while he was speed-walking out of there and asked him for any words of wisdom he'd like to offer the Reform Party. Well, they should keep working at it, he said. They never saw Pat Buchanan again. His legacy persisted, though, even if few of us recognized where exactly it came from. Let's look back to that press conference in which he announced Foster as his VP.
And cleaning up what I think is the dismal swamp of American politics, draining that swamp.
Sound familiar? Donald Trump didn't necessarily drain the swamp straight from Buchanan. Several other politicians have used that line. It's just one of many similarities that abound. The nationalism that was always laid on thick, the fear-mongering over immigration, the strong-arm tactics, the rallying of angry townsfolk that helped him take over a listless political party, so much of it was there. Although it doesn't seem likely that Trump drew direct inspiration from his one-time Reform Party rival, it has been suggested, as Politico did in 2017, that Buchanan's runs in 92 and 96 softened up the GOP for Trump's eventual arrival. But having just relived his 2000 reform performance, it's pretty tough to believe he ever accomplished anything at all. So what was the difference between Buchanan's government-funded road trip and a Trump campaign that won 62 million votes? Well, the latter belonged to a major party, was an entertainer, had way more money to spend, the list goes on, but one significant reason, I think, was that Trump appealed to the self above everything else. You have been wronged. What you want matters. You are the superstar. America doesn't belong to everybody who lives here, it belongs to you. Buchanan instead tried to anchor his resentment politics to some broader shared idea of righteousness and moral good. He didn't play the game this constituency wants you to play. They say they read the good book, but in large part they very obviously do not. If you're gonna stand for those things, you can wave the Bible around all you want, but the unspoken deal is that you sure as hell had better not open it. It all makes sense. This 99 variable equation balances perfectly. That's the wildest thing about it. All of this, every single bizarre twist and turn of this, makes sense and was more or less inevitable. Buchanan successfully hijacked the party because he was able to find loopholes in party rules because they were so loosely constructed, because Ross Perot hated doing all the boring stuff that is demanded by the realities of American politics. Buchanan was there in the first place because Perot was desperate to keep Jesse Ventura in check, because Ventura's emergence as a party superstar was threatening Perot's ego, because Ventura, unlike Perot, actually won an election, which was a victory Perot couldn't claim any part of, because the billionaire Perot wouldn't even throw Ventura a few $1,000 as a goodwill gesture, because Ventura belonged to a state party that had previously dared to vote against Perot, because Perot had been accused of rigging the party in his favor, because Perot liked to brush the rules aside once they became inconvenient, because at the end of all of it, Perot could never seem to decide whether all this was about his duty to America in quest to resolve its ills, or just his chance to live out his own TV show and talk shit and have a good time. All of this was made possible by the initial ascent of Perot, who packaged the grievances of Jack Gargan and his disgruntled mail-in masses into something that was far more entertaining, compelling, and seemingly genuine than anything the Dems or GOP had to offer. Perot, while not single-handedly capable of achieving escape velocity, initiated the ignition sequence with precisely the right fuel at precisely the optimal point in history. In 1992, living in America did not necessarily feel good if you were, for instance, an Appalachian community being wrecked by public health crises, or one of many black Americans seeing their families and communities torn apart by the war on drugs and a barbarous legal system. But the popular idea among the upper middle class, the professional class, the media class, the people most likely to, say, vote, was that as of 1992, America had won. We just won the Cold War, we just won the Gulf War, terrorism and school shootings were still out in the offing. This was the year Francis Fukuyama published his book, The End of History and the Last Man, in which he explicitly put words to a sort of ambient hunch that had been floating around in the ether. That since fascism and communism had now both been defeated, American democracy represented the final and ideal form of human government. Game over. We won. So if that's the way you feel about it, what do you do next? Well, you knock out some chores. Clean up the garage, fix the gutters, balance the federal budget. If you weren't around for the early to mid-90s, would you believe that the federal deficit was all anyone ever talked about? Even as a 9-year-old, I heard about it all the time despite not knowing or caring about it at all. It's gotta be pretty funny for you to look back on a time when that issue won a guy 20 million votes. It was the optimal time and place for Ross Perot and his message. He was the Stage 1 rocket, but the thing about being a Stage 1 rocket is that you don't get to go to the moon. Once you've done your job and reached a certain elevation, they are gonna have to cut you loose. The second stage rocket, which can navigate more precisely and has a lot less to carry, will take over from there. There's just no point in you sticking around anymore. You'll do all harm and no good, you're dead weight. But Ross insisted on keeping himself attached, even after stepping away as the party's front-facing ambassador. He kept on meddling, kept on sowing confusion and division. As a direct consequence, neither he nor they ever entered orbit. And that didn't have to mean winning the presidency. It could have meant remaining strong enough to force concessions from the major parties, or winning House or Senate elections, or putting council members in office in major cities. None of that happened. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. We could all go on for quite a while, retracing all the things we think they should have done differently. I can give it a try. First, I'm not sure a fiscally centrist platform could capture people's imaginations for the long haul, especially if they're institutionally neutral on social issues and don't highly prioritize civil rights or gay rights or women's rights. On the organizational front, as painful as it is to admit, they really did need to start doing it like the big kids do it and bring in seasoned lawyers and political vets. Political historians often lament the Reform Party's tunnel vision, suggesting that they were looking at things upside down and spent way too much money and energy on unrealistic presidential runs. While doing so did pay big dividends for them at the outset, I think they would have been better off using that momentum to regroup and party build at the state and local levels. In so doing, they hopefully would have broadened and diversified their support base just a little bit. Buchananites aside, it's not as though they all intentionally set out to build a constituency that, if the deluge of press photos are any indication, was almost exclusively white. But it really came back to bite Ross the day he realized that what he thought was America was actually just the part of America that looked like him. I mean, past a certain point, if you are not at least trying to expand your coalition in this way, you should probably limit your political ambitions to, repaving the feeder road outside your subdivision. Now, even if they had done all these things, and done them well, and avoided all these pitfalls, who's to say what they would have amounted to? Maybe there always was a shelf life for this movement, and it would have faded from view in a much more gradual, much less entertaining manner. But it does make you wonder, doesn't it? Not about this independent movement, but the next one. This is coincidental, but compelling nonetheless. Our world began right after the Reform Party's world ended. The near quarter century since has been defined by a protracted, relatively quiet unwinding of ideas of justice and fairness and things operating like they're supposed to, punctuated by catastrophic events so fundamental to our history that they claim entire years. We only need to see the 4 digits. We can paint the rest of the picture from there. Some were acts of God, at least in part, but while most developed nations would have adequately invested and mobilized to contain the destruction, we learned that our leaders were too inept, negligent, and ultimately indifferent to do the same. Others were entirely man-made, soup to nuts, and when the men who made them saw zero consequences, we were reminded that the leaders you put in office are in service of them, not you. These definitional events have taken very different forms, but they all share 2 signature qualities. First, they're all not only avoidable in part or in whole, but in many cases actively, infuriatingly, horrifyingly opted into. Second, it is both major parties who are responsible for them. Sometimes they more or less take turns, other times they join forces in equal measure. There's a world in which both these parties would suffer defections on a massive scale as a consequence, but our votes are often informed not by what we want, not by what we believe in, but by what appears to be less dangerous. It's hard to blame us for retreating to that calculus because the alternatives become more immiserating with each passing year. But what it means is that the onus has shifted. It's no longer their responsibility to win you over, which is, I swear to God, the way it once was to a considerable extent. No, the responsibility is yours to get in line, and if you don't, and if they fall short, especially by a small margin, it's not their fault for failing to sufficiently reflect the people's will and fight for the things that most need fighting for. It is your fault for everything that comes after. Interestingly, you tend to catch a lot more flack if you vote third party than if you don't vote at all, despite it making no mathematical difference. Those who voted for Nader in 2000 heard it, those who voted for Jill Stein in 2016 heard it. Your selfishness, your juvenile impulses, your nihilistic drive to throw away your vote is what has doomed us all. So, you voted for us last time and were left out in the cold? Well, you need to vote for us a second time. You voted for us 3, 4, 5 times, and you're fed up with being ignored? You have no right to be fed up. Do the math and fall in line. We are the only chance you've got. Hold your nose and walk in there and pull the curtain and punch the hole and shut the fuck up. And you know what the most intolerable, unbearable part of that is? It's the nagging, unrelenting idea that they might be right. That the best possible world really is the second worst. Others will make an argument that's similar, only much more reasonable and empathetic. Look, they're terrible, you know it and I know it, but the only realistic way to affect change is to identify your party of choice and work within that party to push it where it needs to be. It's a pretty grim thing of them to ask of you to look back at the party who's kicked you around for 20 years and then resolve to give them 20 more, but who knows? Maybe they're right too. Something tells me that you are not exactly looking to me for guidance here, which is smart on your part, because while I personally have my hunches, it's neither my strong suit nor my business to prescribe any particular way forward. I'm just a guy who reads the paper, nothing more than that. At the risk of condescending or giving you permission for something you did not ask permission for, there is one and only one argument I will allow myself to make with full and absolute confidence. You are not wrong to consider a third option. You're not wrong to think about it, to talk about it, to want it, to vote for it, to advocate for it, to help organize it. You are allowed to have this. This is idealism. It might be juvenile, it might be strategically unsound, and on this spoke of the wheel at least, it's probably likely to fail by at least some measure. If it ever does succeed, it might be so far down the wheel you will never see it. But it's all yours. This is the gift the Reform Party has given us. Their politics might not look at all like yours. They might have presented shortcomings that you yourself do not suffer from. But these goofballs allow us to look back on a time not all that long ago, within most of our lifetimes, and do away with the illusion that it is not possible. They allow us to imagine it. That is their legacy. If this were to become a way forward, we might answer the most interesting question. Who is this? Who is this? Who exactly are we looking at right now? This sometimes lovable, often frustrating, sometimes insufferable gaggle of eccentrics and weirdos and misfits. Is this a funny mirror reflection, a caricature of ourselves? Or is it ourselves? Are they just the worst of us? Or are they us? Is this the only way it can ever turn out? Are we incapable of anything but this? Is an independent spirit impossible to uncouple from the failings that birth that spirit? Are we just too fucked up? If we do find the answer, there's no telling when, or how slowly, or how suddenly it might unfold. History's long, it requires patience, but there are things, perhaps even great things, awaiting us that neither you nor I have any way of seeing from the cheap seats of the present. Nobody saw them coming. They arrived overnight. And if you squint hard enough and you look past their failings for just long enough, you see people driven forward by their convictions, by a sincerely felt mandate to make this place better. Before anyone could make sense of what was unfolding, they won far more than anyone had thought possible. They will not be the last.